During the onset of spring 1945, the aviators of the U.S. Army Air Force in Europe were recovering from the largest engagement in American military annals, commonly known as the Battle of the Bulge. The toll they had paid, both in terms of personnel and equipment, had been staggering. Each day, fresh pilots and newly delivered aircraft arrived to replenish the dwindling ranks. P-47 Thunderbolt fighter squadrons were actively stationed at former German Luftwaffe air bases, situated just a few miles from the front lines. Their revised objective was to offer aerial assistance for the Army's onward push into Germany. Ranked among the swiftest and most potent fighter aircraft globally, the Thunderbolts achieved velocities of nearly 600 miles an hour during steep descents. Their pilots were some of the best. 7 out of the top 10 American fighter aces in Europe flew Thunderbolts. Flying without pressure suits, only strong, young men could withstand the forces of gravity built up after a steep dive. They were all tough, well-trained, and their morale was high. In March 1945, Arthur Davis was a replacement pilot assigned to the 362nd Fighter Group based in eastern France near the German border.
They were all about the same age I was, in my early 20s, 23, 24, something like that. And there were very few, a couple guys that were almost 30, and we call them grandfather, that sort of thing. But there were fellows younger than I was. The morale was high. As a matter of fact, I was a little surprised because they have always experienced several casualties over a period of time. And I was a replacement for someone who had been killed in action. And I was expecting something other than that, but the morale was very high.
A fighter group consisted of 3 squadrons, each containing 16 planes and 25 pilots. Sustaining a Thunderbolt fighter group consisting of 48 planes necessitated extensive resources, including lengthy supply routes, a contingent of 75 pilots, 1,200 ground crew members, meteorologists, operational officers, radio and radar operators, anti-aircraft gunners, fuel and distribution networks, as well as high-skilled engineers for runway construction and maintenance. Each plane in the group needed a crew of 25 men just to keep flying. And work went on around the clock. During its era, the P-47 Thunderbolt held the distinction of being the largest, weightiest, and most formidable single-engine fighter aircraft ever constructed. Its pilots regarded it as nearly as robust as a tank and remarkably challenging to bring down. With its 2,400 horsepower engine, it weighed almost 8 tons fully loaded. Every plane carried a film camera in the wing, timed to operate automatically with the gun trigger. Numerous frontline fighter aircraft were engaged in as many as 3 missions daily, necessitating meticulous coordination among every individual within the group to maintain these planes airborne. The confidence of the pilots and their ground crew was essential. Any overlooked detail could cost them their lives. 23-year-old Ken Bullock flew 46 combat missions in Thunderbolts during the last months of the war.
You know, there were supposed to be some rules about fraternizing with the enlisted men and all that stuff. That went out the window the minute we joined the squadron. We were all in there together. It didn't matter if you were a private or a colonel. You were all on the same team. You knew each other. I mean, you showed respect, don't get me wrong, but the people really worked together. You talk about cooperation and communication. It was there. And I am so proud to be a part of that.
We liberated a supply dump or something full of Mercedes convertibles. And it turned out that almost every pilot in the 377th had his own convertible.
As of March 1945, the role of the P-47s had shifted from providing bomber escort to delivering immediate air support for the progressing ground forces and armored units. Flying attacks from as low as 50 feet were costing many pilots lives. A new man joining a Thunderbolt group at this time in the war had been a life expectancy of just 2 missions. With more than 100 combat missions behind them, some squadron commanding officers had reached the rank of major, many by the age of just 24. In the aerial clash above Germany, they would guide their comrades into the cockpits and down the runway. Nearly 50% of these filmed pilots, encompassing both seasoned veterans and recent replacements, would become casualties a mere 10 weeks later as the war drew to a close. The coming battle would take place over one of the greatest natural defense obstacles in Europe, the Rhine River. No foreign army had crossed the Rhine into Germany in 150 years. The battle would last for 3 weeks. All Thunderbolts were now flying 3 combat missions a day. 22-year-old Lieutenant Paul Odell was a veteran of 45 combat missions, many of them over the Rhine.
And they would have a crew chief and the assistant there. They would get us up in the plane. Then naturally we had to start the plane up in that area and have the crew chief get on a wing because we had to taxi out over chicken wire and straw, and he had to guide us along because we couldn't weave back and forth to see where we were going. So then we would finally get to the end of the runway, and we'd get lined up in we'd get lined up in position, our takeoff position, depending on where we were in the flight. Well, when you're on the flight line, ready to take off, I mean, some things go through your mind. I think my own particular deal, you felt kind of invincible, so you weren't really expecting anything to happen to you, and so it didn't really prey on your mind that much.
The day began at 3:30 in the morning, when pilots were woken for the daily briefing. At dawn, the engines would start.
And beside the throttle, you had the supercharger had to be opened up with it because they give you an extra horsepower to get the thing off the ground, especially if it was loaded, heavily loaded with bombs. Main thought was to keep the plane straight going down the runway and get in the air and go do your job and come back. You didn't think about being killed.
Takeoff is a marvelous feeling because you have full control of an over 2,000 horsepower engine. And when you put that throttle to the firewall, we call it, all the way forward, you've got all the power you need to take off, and it thrusts you back in your seat hard against the trackpad in the back. And you know that you're going to go up and fly.
The conquest of the Reich was about to begin. In March 1945, just a short while after equipping their aircraft's wings with cameras, the Thunderbolt fighters of the United States would confront their most substantial offensive yet, a strike aimed at the Luftwaffe's air bases lining Germany's River Rhine.
When you had 16 planes, usually there were 3 groups of 4 below, and the top flight was called cover flight. And they usually weren't carrying bombs. They were just there to protect us from enemy aircraft that we may not spot.
You are alone. Even though you're a part of a flight of 16 airplanes, you're still alone. You're the master of your own destiny. It's an exhilarating feeling.
Waiting in the skies was the Luftwaffe, desperate to stop the American Army of the Rhine, diving at high speeds from above the Thunderbolt formations. Violent dogfights would suddenly begin between planes barely 150 yards apart, firing over 100 bullets a second.
I knew when I'd see tracers going from behind my plane in front of me that he was behind me somewhere, and I was bound this wasn't going to happen. And I thought, oh, buddy, you have had it. You picked the wrong guy today. And I nail him and then go look for somebody else.
For dogfighting, it is exciting. I could see these planes coming from our right, and I'm hauling to my wing leader to brake right, so we both brake right at the same time because you always turn into them. And they were shooting, and that was the first time I realized you could hear their guns inside your cockpit, so that's how close they were.
I just happened to look up in my mirror, and I saw this ME-109 on my tail, and I had 100 hits before I realized that I was even being hit, and I pulled up, almost went into a stall, and that gives you an indication how fast it all happens. And you don't have much time to think about it. You're doing it really to save your life and get out of the gunfire.
Meanwhile, concealed within a shroud of smoke, General George Patton was propelling his 3rd U.S. Army towards the Rhine, undertaking a bold endeavor to secure a foothold on the eastern bank of the river. The Rhine had been Germany's natural defense line since Roman times. Patton was about to attempt what Caesar had accomplished 2,000 years earlier, but no general since Napoleon. A separate U.S. Army, the 9th, had arrived at the Rhine 3 weeks earlier. Nevertheless, all its attempts to establish a lasting bridgehead across the river had been foiled by resolute Nazi resistance. Patton's plan relied on the fast Thunderbolts, knocking out German resistance ahead of his advancing army.
Supporting the Rhine River attack, it got so we would be flying maybe 4-ship missions and going out, many missions. We would take 2, maybe even 3 missions a day where we'd be going out and getting whatever targets we could that would stop us from going across the Rhine. Now, sometimes we'd have a lot of targets, such as a radio station. Other times we would be going to the front line support controllers and attacking targets for them.
And that one town would not surrender, and they announced to the people with loudspeakers, I guess, mounted on the tanks, that they're given 5 minutes to surrender the town, and they never surrendered. And so we worked the town over, and after that, we were finished. You can imagine maybe 50 or 60 airplanes with 50 caliber rockets. That town was level. I don't think there was a mouse left.
Without air cover and with no place to hide, the German tanks proved vulnerable to airstrikes. In a span of 110 days, over 500 of them were obliterated through aerial assaults by ground-attacking fighter bombers. These aircraft surged forward at speeds surpassing 300 miles an hour and skimmed as close as 50 feet above the terrain. Even individual German soldiers found themselves abruptly subjected to thunderous onslaughts from these aircraft. Patton's gamble completely surprised the Germans as well as Eisenhower. Silently and without discharging a single artillery round, Patton's Third Army clandestinely traversed the Rhine at Oppenheim, located to the south of Frankfurt. They successfully reached the eastern bank under the cloak of darkness, precisely at 10:30 p.m. on the evening of March 22nd. The nocturnal operation had cost only 28 American casualties. The following day, Patton's tanks, troops, and supplies streamed across the once invincible defense line. His fast-moving army spread out, encircling more than 200,000 German soldiers and taking them prisoner. Patton then ordered the captured soldiers to march through the city's main square as a symbol of defeat to the German civilians who were forced to watch. The German radar-controlled anti-aircraft flak was taking its toll on the American Air Force. Dozens of Thunderbolts were hit, wounding the pilots and damaging the planes. Landings became as difficult and dangerous as the missions themselves.
So you would simply come down with your flight below the tower, and they would shoot a gun with a green light or red light, and you would peel off one after the other, and you would literally go into a chandelle, which is like going upside down, drop your wheels while you're upside down, and do a tight turn and come in. And usually you try to do it under 1 minute. Now, there was a reason for that. If each pilot did it in 1 minute, you can determine that you have 50 planes. They would be landing in 50 minutes if that worked out correctly.
Fire and ambulance crews on runway alert waited for the planes to return. Amidst a scarcity of fuel in most aircraft and others unable to deploy their landing gear due to flak-induced damage, a considerable number of pilots were compelled to execute crash landings. Unfortunately, these landings frequently led to catastrophic outcomes, including ruptured fuel lines and the presence of unexploded bombs and rockets still affixed to their compromised aircraft.
The average life of a fighter pilot was, I believe, about 4 hours as an average. But I think everyone was concerned with the tremendous losses in the pilots. we had an abnormal amount of fatalities. Just analyzing how many pilots we were losing, it wasn't that I gave up hope. I suppose it made me try harder subconsciously, but I just couldn't visualize myself coming back in the United States and stepping off a boat or a plane. I just couldn't picture it in my mind.
You felt badly when one of your squadron mates got shot down, and particularly if you knew he was killed. I mean, you couldn't really dwell on it because that was it and it was gone. Yeah?
I lost some friends, and we would lose 3 or 4 pilots a week, and it seemed like it was always one at a time.
At the time, the air battle over the Rhine was the largest operation of the Second World War. On one day alone, March the 24th, Allied pilots flew 12,000 combat missions, more than were flown on D-Day 10 months before.
We sent 8 out, and 1 came back. That was a bad morning. And when the guy pulled up and taxied up, he stood up in the cockpit and emptied his 45 into the cockpit. He never flew again. They took him to the hospital.
The quiet period we had before takeoff on a mission was something that was designed by some flight surgeon somewhere, but it was a very important thing. It was approximately 5 minutes long, and it enabled each and every one of us already strapped into our fighter plane to re-sift and rehash our thinking and calm ourselves down to get ready for the task at hand. The first time I did it, I thought it was rather foolish. Let's get up and go. That was my attitude. Then after experiencing this quiet time once or twice, I realized how important it was. My whole attitude changed in that 5 minutes. And I imagined that it leaked over into the flight crews, the mechanics, the armorers, the other people, and they felt the same thing. It was sort of a feeling of peace almost that came across.
The times that you really didn't feel like you wanted to go on a mission, I suppose, is when they would announce at the briefing that we're going to hit an airdrome today. And a lot of pilots would just back out. They'd say they suddenly would be sick or something. Not many, but the pilots that went through an awful lot, and you knew you were going to get hit. It's just not a guess, an assumption. It was an assumption. You were going to get hit, but how severe, you don't know.
April the 16th would be the darkest day in the German Luftwaffe's history, when they were attacked by the Thunderbolts and their Allied forces. The Thunderbolt squadrons of the 362nd Fighter Group targeted the Luftwaffe with devastating results. 24 German aerodromes were attacked with guns and rockets fired from altitudes of just 20 feet above the ground. Their air raids destroyed 270 planes on the ground and another 29 in the air, along with numerous hangars, flak gun emplacements, and fuel tanks. After more than 3 years of war, which had cost thousands of fighter pilots their lives, the P-47 pilots of the 362nd would show no mercy. On April the 16th, the combined British and U.S. Air Forces mounted one of the largest attacks on the Luftwaffe. 6,000 Allied airplanes targeted 40 aerodromes inside Germany. 2,000 fighter planes would take part in the attack. Their mission was to destroy the Luftwaffe once and for all. But German air bases were heavily defended by radar-controlled anti-aircraft flak guns. Many pilots and their planes would not return from this mission. Those that did carried with them the record taken by the mounted cameras.
I have been conditioned to hate the German army, the German military, and this was brought about by some schooling in the service, I'm quite sure. Most of it was a subliminal type of thing, but I wanted to kill.
It gave you a sense of gratitude when we hit an airdrome, in one sense, because it was payback time. These were the guys that were up there trying to shoot you down, and we had a chance now to put them to sleep. And so in that sense, it was a good feeling.
I would peel off, first of all, and dive down toward the target, get the target in my gun sights, and then fire a preliminary quick burst to clear the guns and make sure that everything was working properly. Then when I got close enough, and I used to go as close as I thought I could, and they said they gave a distance of several yards, but I tried to close a little closer because I realized that although we had 1,800 rounds of ammunition, it went very quickly, and I might need it for something else. So when I got as close as I dared, then I would pull hard on the trigger and give it all it had for about 2 or 3 seconds. That's all it's needed.
From a low-level attack, you would probably come alongside at about 1,000 feet and then peel off down and come straight in on the target. And that's the time you try and get everything leveled up and get the sight on the target and then give them the burst.
Anti-aircraft was one of the things we probably feared because there wasn't much control what we could do about it. And when they would set the guns on you with radar, you could hear it in the headset. It would go bzzz, 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 like that. You could hear it, and you knew that there was a dish down there that locked you in and they were getting ready to shoot.
At the end of the day, 905 German aircraft and 40 aerodromes had been destroyed. Unopposed in the air, the Thunderbolts were unleashed over Germany. On April the 16th, 1945, the Thunderbolt fighter group and the combined Allied forces scored a major victory over Germany's Luftwaffe. With the front lines moving quickly eastward, driven by tanks and infantry, the Thunderbolt fighter groups were ordered to move with them. Captured aerodromes in sight of Germany were to be repaired and used as forward bases of operation. When the Air Corps engineers arrived at Frankfurt to inspect an aerodrome, they were confronted with the damage that had been inflicted. What little was left undamaged by the Thunderbolt attacks had been destroyed by the Germans themselves, obeying Hitler's scorched earth policy throughout Germany. The Fuhrer had vowed that if Allies did overrun the fatherland, they would inherit a wasteland. Luftwaffe planes were found destroyed by the dozens, crushed on the ground. Hangars, barracks, and supply quarters were still burning from recent air raids. The once powerful German Luftwaffe, which had struck terror into the hearts of the people all over Europe for 6 years, was now a smoldering hulk of its former invincibility. Starved of fuel and spare parts, its famous fighter aces captured or dead. In 6 years of war, more than 94,000 Luftwaffe planes had been lost, and with them, over 138,000 airmen. Runways and hangars were quickly repaired. The 362nd Fighter Group moved to their new forward airbase at Frankfurt, their fourth in 10 months. From here, the Thunderbolts would rampage over Germany for the next 18 days, attacking anything that moved. The final humiliating misery of Germany was about to begin.
There wasn't exactly a fear of not coming back. We realized it was the possibility, definitely was there. But your job was to get the target we were assigned and be sure that your wingman, or if you were the wingman or the element leader or flight leader, took care of each other and to be sure you got back. That was our mission. Destroy the target and get back.
Finding targets of opportunity was the order of the day. Skimming the terrain at low altitudes above urban areas and rural landscapes, Thunderbolt pilots would execute sudden dives onto unsuspecting targets. They would release a barrage from their 8 50 caliber machine guns, bombs, and rockets. For the German army, there remained no refuge, as there was no safe haven from this relentless assault.
You could see the whites of their eyes, so to speak, whether it was troops or people on motorcycles or trucks or freight cars full of ammunition or whatever. You could very quickly see what you had to shoot at.
So anytime we saw a train, first guy down got to shoot the engine, the locomotive. You could tell if you got a good hit because all the steam would come up from it and the train would stop. Then you would pick at it car to car. Everyone would take turns until you just about set the whole train on fire.
Many of those targets were horse-drawn vehicles being tethered by women. Those wagons were full of ammunition, and you start up your pattern, and it was a repeat pattern. You'd keep making pass after pass, regroup, start passing again, and you'd end up with 20, 30 horse-drawn vehicles splattered all over the road, and you'd watch the horses go flying 20 feet in the air when those 50 caliber bullets hit. It was just awesome, the power behind those bullets, and the roads would be actually red with blood. You did your job, but you didn't quite feel so great about it.
Coming along, I happened to look down, and there was a bridge that looked like a viaduct, an old Roman viaduct bridge in a way, and it had a truck on top of it. So I thought I'd just shoot the rocket at that. And then after I started down, I thought, well, I might as well salvo all 4 of them. So I let all 4 go and pulled up because you don't see the rockets hit on the way down. And as I pulled up and turned around to see if I'd hit, well, the whole bridge was gone and the truck as well.
I wouldn't start a dive bomb no less than 8, maybe 10 or 12,000. Reason being, you come straight down with the aircraft. You release your bombs while you're in that vertical position. And then when they go, then the main thing you should do is get out. Get out of the way. The tanks were very tough. The Tiger tanks they had were really good, and they all carried, or most of them carried, a fuel tank behind them in a trailer. So what we would do is not worry about the tank. We'd hit the trailer and set it on fire. And if it came loose or whatever, then we would shoot the bullets right underneath the tank, and they'd bounce up from the ground or whatever row they were on or whatever up into inside the tank, because they weren't armor plated underneath, but they were on top and on the sides. So we still found a way to get in.
We used napalm several times, and it was very effective. One of the places where we could use napalm to full efficiency was dropping a load of napalm on top of a Panzer tank. If the hatch was open, of course, you can imagine what would happen. If the hatch was closed, the napalm would spread all over and immediately catch fire, and it would be like having meat in an oven. They would be roasted inside.
It's like putting the airplane on like you would a jacket when you get in it. You wear the airplane and you become part of it, and you're pushing of the rudder and the throttle and the stick. It's all automatic, just like when you walk. You just one leg ahead of the other one. You don't say, I'm going to push this, I'm going to do that. You just do it.
Yeah, we had many times where pilots were missing. That would be the time that you would dread the most, when you'd get back into echelon for landing and there'd be 1 plane or 2 planes missing. It just stayed with you for quite a while. I never thought I'd return back home alive as a pilot. It just never occurred to me that I would. In fact, I had premonition that I would never come back. Didn't think I'd make it.
On May the 1st, 1945, the Thunderbolt pilots flew their last combat mission over Germany. 7 days later, the Germans surrendered.
VE Day was a big relief, you know. And then you knew that you had a really good chance to get home. The problem was during combat, every night when you go to bed, the prayer I would say is, just let me make it through tomorrow so I can thank you for that day tonight, because it was a one day at a time thing. And when we knew that it was over, it was a big relief. Of course, then we had another question right away: will I be transferred to the Pacific? And some guys were, and some weren't.
As jubilant celebrations echoed throughout the streets of Paris, London, and New York, the Thunderbolt pilots who remained in Germany assumed a solemn and contemplative demeanor. They marveled at their survival, yet were profoundly affected by the pervasive death, devastation, and suffering in the midst. Hundreds of thousands of German war orphans were living on the streets as beggars, while millions of liberated refugees and concentration camp prisoners from all over Europe awaited transportation back to their homeland. Throughout the continent, German soldiers were made to walk back their defeated country.
German prisoners started to march through. There were hundreds and hundreds of German prisoners, and you could look the way their shoulders were sagging, their heads hunched over. They were a beaten army, and they just had no strength. Their morale was down to zero. And it was not a pretty sight to see. And there were so many amputees with either an arm missing or leg, heads bandaged.
Throughout the war, a fighter pilot never saw the face of his enemy, only the face of the country. The end of the war finally brought them properly face to face, to see for the first time the people they had fought and the damage they had inflicted. In May, the columns of soldiers stretching for miles began their long march back to Germany from over every corner of Europe. 6 million soldiers walked down many of the same roads and through many of the same towns they had conquered 5 years before, but this time not as the victors. It was a bitter end to the war. The death toll in the Second World War was higher than in any war of recorded history, an estimated 55 million. The European war that ended on May 8, 1945, had been a total war on land, at sea, and in the air, fought by the armies, navies, and air forces of over 20 countries, waged mercilessly on civilians. For all the battles fought during these terrible war years, more civilians died in the conflict than soldiers. The defeated Germany these soldiers returned to was in ruins. Not one family had emerged unscathed. But victory in the air had come at a terrible price. 18,000 U.S. fighter planes and bombers were shot down over Europe, taking the lives of 80,000 pilots and crew. During 5 years of air raids on Germany, Allied aircraft dropped almost 3 million tons of bombs, killing 600,000 German civilians. 5 million houses were destroyed, leaving 20 million people homeless. The 50 largest German cities were reduced to hollow walls and rubble. Transportation and communication systems had ceased to function, as well as all levels of government. Hitler's total war had brought Germany to utter destruction and shame for the crimes of the Nazis.
When you see the destruction at the end of the war, I mean, you can't believe how anyone could have done that and how anyone could have lived through it. You know, I mean, it's so complete destruction that it kind of boggles your mind to figure how people could have survived that. Yeah.
I miss the camaraderie, the action, the flying, the purposeness of missions, and the sudden ability to get something done. And I don't find that as much in peacetime. We were all friends with everybody in the squadron. And we had a feel of almost of brotherhood, because we were involved in exactly the same business, each of us. And the only thing that separated one from the other was length of time. How long were you able to stay alive? We trusted each other implicitly. There was never any even suggestion of someone who could not be trusted, or someone, in other words, I would put my life on the line for somebody else, and they would do the same for me.
In the conquest of the Reich, the Thunderbolt pilots of the 362nd Fighter Group flew more than 3,000 combat missions. For their bravery, the group was awarded a Presidential Unit Citation. But half of their pilots had been killed, captured, or wounded, and 48 Thunderbolts have been destroyed. The remaining planes were scrapped in the following months, with only a handful surviving to this day across the world. They came home shot full of holes too numerous to count, with chunks of engine missing and hydraulic fluid bleeding through the gaping tears in the aluminum skin. Love them or hate them, nobody's ever questioned the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt's ability to bring a pilot back safely.
It absorbed, as I said, a tremendous amount of damage and would still fly. The inline engine wouldn't absorb anything. The radial engine, you know, we had cases of people losing several cylinders and still coming back.
They would really take, like I said, really take a beating from being shot up or anything, more than any other aircraft. They were really a tough bird.
There was one case when I was waiting for takeoff, and the plane came in and landed, and it had been hit in the engine, and one piston was flipping up and down in the air, and the other piston was gone, and the plane flew in and landed, and the guy pulled off the runway. He didn't taxi it, and he got out.
47 was a great airplane for that. It absorbed tremendous damage and, you know, would still fly. The group commander took it through a tree. Literally, the aircraft went through, the tree was the loser, and the wings didn't come off, but, you know, he just forgot what he was flying and what altitude he was at and went through a pretty large tree. Lots of damage, structural damage on the wings, but the aircraft came home. I don't think that, I know a 51 wouldn't have done it. I don't think a 40 or I don't think a 38 would have done it. So it was that kind of an aircraft.
I had dropped my bomb, done my job. I headed home. I get back and I land, and people are running alongside the aircraft pointing at it as I taxied. And I lean out and look, and the whole side is covered with oil. And when I got out, I got a hole a foot big in the engine and 2 cylinders missing. But it ran fine.
For 2 critical years, the P-47 Thunderbolt served as the backbone of the U.S. Army Air Force's fighter force, battling on every front in every conceivable climate and terrain. The P-47 played a major role in the defeat of the Luftwaffe in the skies over Europe. Yet since the end of World War II, the P-47 has been overshadowed by the fame and glamour of the Lockheed P-38 and North American P-51 Mustang.
I think it's comparing a racehorse to a plow horse. The P-47 was I think you could describe it as the bare knuckles brawler. It wasn't the sleek thoroughbred as the Spitfire. It wasn't the graceful, pre-war design of the P-38 that was like the Buck Rogers fighter plane of World War II. I mean, the P-38 was what everybody dreamed of. The Thunderbolt, I think, what endeared itself most of all to the pilots was the fact that it had tremendous firepower. It could carry a huge load for ground support, which is exactly what it was best at, I think. And it could take incredible amounts of battle damage. I mean, you've seen pictures of airplanes that have hit trees. They've got cylinders knocked off the engines. The cowling's gone. The wings are canted back. Just the leading edge of the wings are just beat off. The gun barrels are torn from the airplane, and it flies all the way home and brings the pilot back. I think that is the greatest quality of the airplane.
By war's end, over 15,600 P-47s had been produced, more than any other American aircraft, save the consolidated B-24 Liberator. Even today, the P-47 Thunderbolt inspires intense emotions amongst the pilots assigned to fly it. After sharing the air with the 47, a pilot either came back a devoted converse or appalled that the Republic ever designed such a monstrous fighter.
When I took my training, I took it at Bradley Field in Connecticut, and there were P-40 pilots that were there, and they didn't fly with you, and all they did was check you out, and they weren't really too enthused with the P-47. So when I went overseas, I did not want to fly the P-47. I wanted to get out of the 38s or 51s. And when I got to this base, a P-47 came over there, and he went across that base. He pulled up and did one roll, and we just were in awe, My God, that thing will fly. And I went from 1 inch tall to 10 foot tall. It was a great experience looking back on it, flying the 47. It was a very forgiving aircraft, and the work that we flew it, used it for, was great. But, it's like anything. A driver of a car, airplane drivers are the same way. You fall in love with something, and you don't want to trade. You don't want to get rid of the things. And, we weren't smart enough to know that, well, it's probably going to save their life many more times than the 38 might, because it's not as vulnerable as an inline engine aircraft. There's a 40, 51, or 38, but it still was not my first love by any means.
The models that I flew were very sluggish and climbing. In fact, I didn't consider it very good until you got to higher altitude, where your supercharged engine was a big advantage. I think a fighter pilot would probably live longer in a P-47 than any other fighter. It's more rugged by far than any other fighter. And we only had them for a short time. They gave us our P-40s, or we were flying P-40s at the time, all the time that we were transitioning into the 47s, and they just decided to take the P-47s away and let us continue with the P-40s. And I think we were all happy about that.
Love or hate the P-47, everyone agreed on one thing. It was the toughest fighter ever built. Practically everyone who flew the Thunderbolt has a story to tell about its legendary durability. They speak of holes hacked out of the wing by light flak that were so big ground crewmen posed with their heads poking through them. Others remember cannon shells severing controls, tearing great gouges out of the cowling. They remember the thumping of the bullets as they slammed into the armor plating behind their seat. And they remember thanking God and Republic for building the P-47 like a brick outhouse. Tough enough to handle the dirtiest of dirty work and built to survive a Kansas tornado. The P-47 owes its genesis to a Russian emigre turned aircraft designer named Alexander Kartveli. He had come to the United States between the wars and had started his own aircraft company in the 1930s.
He was a Russian immigrant who flew during World War I and was a great proponent of pursuit aviation. The P-35 was his original fighter, low-wing, all-metal, retractable landing gear. The second aircraft was the P-43 Lancer, which was a further refinement of the P-35 design. The ultimate was the P-47, which was the final derivative.
Just before World War II, Seversky Aviation became Republic Aviation, and the same design team that worked on the P-35 went with Republic and began working on their first major project, which was the P-43 Lancer. And you can see a real clear lineage in the development of the P-47 based on these three designs. The P-35, the P-43, the P-47 all share common characteristics and resemble each other. Well, the P-43 went into production shortly after World War II began, and it served as an export fighter. It wasn't something that the U.S. Army Air Force could use. So Republic sent it overseas to the Chinese, where it did not have a very distinguished service career by any means.
Designed to be a high-altitude fighter, the P-43 has a top speed of 350 miles an hour and could carry a pair of 50 caliber machine guns in the nose and 430 calibers in the wings. Initially delivered in September 1940, the P-43 impressed some with its high service ceiling of 38,000 feet. Nonetheless, the Lancer proved inferior to most fighters of the day, and the Army Air Corps used them only for tactical reconnaissance training in the United States.
The P-43 was a failed design. There was no way Republic could look at this as anything but a failure. And here they were in the middle of wartime America. They needed to be able to come up with a design that would be effective, not just from a cost standpoint and a contract standpoint, but also they were interested in building a war-winning aircraft. And they chose to go the evolutionary route. So they studied their design. They studied the failure. They examined the reasons why. They got back reports from operational units and decided to progress in a slightly different course, but they did extract some of the better attributes of the P-43, and they applied them to what became the P-47 program.
In 1939, the Army Air Force issued a request for a high-altitude fighter that could use the new turbo-supercharger that Boeing had developed for the B-17 heavy bomber. Such an installation on the fighter would require the plane to be huge indeed, but that didn't deter Republic. After studying the Army Air Force's requirements, the company's chief designer quipped it'll be a dinosaur, but a dinosaur with good proportions.
Because of the Army's specifications on this new fighter, Republic chose to design the P-47 around two main features. The first was a brand new engine called the Pratt Whitney R2800, which was an 18-cylinder radial engine. It was just monstrous, and it provided 2,000 horsepower, which was far more than most any other engine of its day. So it was a very revolutionary engine. The other thing that they needed to design around was the fact that the turbo-supercharger took up a lot of space. So the reason why the fuselage for the P-47 is so deep is because of the fact that the engine was so enormous to begin with, and the ductwork and all the accoutrements for the turbo-supercharger required a massive amount of space.
Dubbed the XP-47B, the new fighter possessed enormous gait. As it sat on its wide, long landing gear, it remained some of a giant milk jug on wheels. As a result, throughout the war, pilots and ground crew rarely referred to the P-47 as anything other than the jug.
In June of 1940, this is a year and a half before the war starts, the U.S. Army Air Corps places an order for 773 P-47s with Republic. And this $56 million contract is really a rich plum for Republic to get. But it represents quite a risk on the part of the Air Corps with the slender resources that are available at the time.
Not only was it risky, but it was a leap of faith that Republic could actually deliver. At the same time, the fact that they did this a year before the prototype flew was also symptomatic of a larger problem, which was there were so few combat-capable aircraft, especially fighter designs, being conceived of and built in the United States at the time, that the Air Force had to take the risk. There really wasn't very many other options.
Republic's early test flights of the prototype revealed tremendous potential and more than justified the Army's leap of faith. Though it weighed over 5 tons, the P-47 could reach speeds over 400 miles an hour. In fact, at altitude, it was the fastest fighter ever built for the Army Air Force up to that time. Tests also show that the P-47 was an excellent formation aircraft.
The 47, when you pulled the power on it, that huge nose out there was like running into a haystack, suddenly equipped. It was easy to fly formation because 38, you'd come in and overrun everybody. It's the first thing that we all learned when we had inline engine. You want to slow down early and sneak up on your flight leader. But on the 47, it was a beautiful airplane for flying close, very close. We trapped our flight leader one time. 2 of us coming up the Irrawaddy River ran into the overlapping wings. And he would go like this, but you wouldn't dare do that in an aircraft that wouldn't stop or start as quickly as a 47.
In close formation, you're leading on, 3 guys are flying on another guy. They're not taking their eyes off of it. And they're flying on him all the time. They're looking at him all the time, especially you get into clouds. If you fly in the clouds, you've got to be in tight formation, otherwise you can run into one another. And you have a mission. We had a mission one time, I think it was a 5-hour mission. We were probably 4 hours in the clouds. And 2 flights finished the mission. The guy was leading the group and my flight. The rest of them went home, got in trouble and went home.
The first production Thunderbolts rolled off Republic's assembly lines in early 1942. That spring, the Army Air Force decided that the 56 Fighter Group would be the inaugural P-47 outfit in the service. It was a historic decision that laid the foundation for one of the greatest legacies in Air Force history. With its P-47 Thunderbolts, the 56 Fighter Group, by war's end, become one of the highest-scoring outfits in history. With dozens of aces in its ranks, the 56 became better known as the Wolf Pack. In the spring of 1942, the recently formed 56 Fighter Group that had been training with a motley collection of P-40s, P-39s, and AT-6s was given the first production batch of Thunderbolts. Known as Zemke's Wolfpack, after the commander's hub Zemke, the 56 Fighter Group would fly P-47s for 3 years straight, while building up a combat history that has become legendary since the war.
Hub Zemke was one of those rare pilots who possessed a very interesting blend of talents. One of the things that he is remembered for is his uncanny marksmanship. He was a great shot. He was also a great aviator. He was a tremendous pilot, had phenomenal talent there. But what really makes him stand out and gives him kind of a uniqueness not found in other aces is the fact that he was a great leader of men as well. He could inspire and lead like few men of World War II. And because of that, and plus his other talents in the air, those combined really made him one of the great combat air leaders of World War II.
56 had most of the aces most of the time. And 56 wound up with the highest air-to-air victories of any group over in the 8th Air Force, and I think any group in the war. And they were second for total aircraft destroyed, but they were first in air-to-air combat. I was assigned to the 63rd Squadron, which was Comstock Squadron. In fact, there was 4 of us got there. There's 4 or 5, and we all finished our tours. And none of us were shot down. I bailed out once, and the other kids may have gotten wounded, but no, we all finished our tours. And that was really pretty good.
In 1942, while still training in the States, the Wolfpack received the first P-47s. The unit's pilots soon discovered the new plane could be a handful. With some dangerous characteristics, the Thunderbolt could kill unsuspecting or inexperienced pilots with frightening frequency.
You got going real fast and you approached the speed of sound, the plane started tucking. What do you do when it tucks straight down? Of course, the minute you start feeling that you pull the power off. And usually by the time you've changed the air a little bit, it'll start coming out and you're all right. I don't know of anyone, there were a couple cases where people did not get the power off fast enough and they went right straight into the ground.
The 56 Fighter Group suffered many accidents in the course of working up with the P-47 in 1942. The reason for these accidents are pretty varied, but basically the bottom line was this. The pilots who were flying this new airplane were used to T-6s and BT-13s, fairly benign aircraft, and the P-47 represented a new level of power and performance that they really were frankly ill-equipped to deal with. So it was a tricky plane to fly. By the time they went to Europe, they had lost over a dozen pilots in training, which represents about 10% of the group dying before they even got into combat.
The pilots had to learn that size didn't matter. The P-47 was simply huge, weighing in at over 13,500 pounds when loaded. With a wingspan of 40 feet and a length of 36 feet and sitting 15 feet off the ground, the P-47 towered over the splendidly legged P-39s and sleek P-40 as the 56 had been flying.
The P-47 was probably what was the heaviest fighter that they built. It weighed 14,000 pounds loaded when you were going to take off on combat.
Despite its size at high altitude, the men of the 56 discovered their new fighter could outperform every other American aircraft, Army, Air Force, or Navy of its day. Its broad wing gave it tremendous agility at heights. Other aircraft could hardly maneuver effectively. Some converts were made right there, fast and brutish-looking. The P-47 was the type of plane that could look like it got into a toe-to-toe fight, take a beating, but always come out on top. And it could dish out far deadlier punishment than any other World War II fighter with 850 caliber machine guns. The Thunderbolt's firepower was truly awesome.
I strafed trains one day and tipped a boxcar over on its side. Not exploded, just tipped it over from the impact. So tremendous firepower on those 850.
Peyton Gross, a 354th Fighter Group Mustang ace, recalls being the receiving end of a P-47 attack when he was mistaken for an ME-109.
P-47s coming in had thought they had two 109, and so they picking me off. They shot my canopy off. It was gone. My plane did a snap roll, was involuntary. And so I was still alive, so I did a spin. I went into a spin. I did a recovery and pulled out, and here came the P-47s again, and I rocked my wing frantically, and this guy pulls up alongside of me and goes, "Oh!" and takes off and leaves me there. And I didn't know how badly my plane had been hit. The radio worked, the controls worked. I came back, and the plane had almost 100 holes in it. Some entry, some leaving, but it was like a sieve.
With terrific firepower, excellent high-altitude performance, and an airframe built to withstand massive amounts of damage, the men of the 56 Fighter Group gradually grew to love their P-47 Thunderbolts. By the time the group deployed to New England to join the 8th Air Force in early 1943, its pilots were some of the fiercest P-47 advocates in the Army Air Force. When the 56th Fighter Group reached England in January of 1943, its pilots were dismayed to learn that they weren't going to be the first P-47 unit into combat after all. As it turned out, the 4th Fighter Group beat them to the punch. Formed from the famous Eagle Squadron the previous year, the 4th Fighter Group converted to Thunderbolts just a few days before the 56 arrived in England. And here, the love-hate relationship that characterized a pilot's relationship with the P-47 began. The man of Don Blakesley's 4th Fighter Group had been used to light the nimble Spitfires. None of them wanted to part with their Spits, especially not for something as huge as ungainly as the Thunderbolt. As much as the 56th Fighter Group loved their P-47s, the 4th despised theirs. The first combat missions flown by the P-47s took place in the spring of 1943. The 8th Air Force had several Thunderbolt groups by then, and the units began flying sweeps over France to get acquainted with air combat.
These early P-47 operations in the fighter sweeps over France were plagued by several difficulties. First of all, this was a new aircraft. It had its fair share of mechanical problems that had to be worked out. Secondly, the American pilots were simply green and inexperienced at this point in the war. And lastly, and probably most significantly, they were up against some of the best German fighter pilots at the time, and therefore some of the best in the world. And they were flying FW-190As and Messerschmitt 109Gs, some of the best fighter aircraft in the world at the time.
Then, on April 15th, Tax Day, Uncle Sam finally received payback for all the money invested in the P-47. A squadron from the 4th Fighter Group, while on patrol over France, caught 2 FW-190s in the air and shot them both down. Those would be the only victories the Thunderbolt would have for quite some time. In the first 2 months of combat operations, the 3 P-47 groups flew 2,279 sorties, resulting in 10 German planes claimed as destroyed. In return, 18 47s had been lost. Both the enemy fire and catastrophic engine failure, and the 56, which had been the biggest supporter of the Thunderbolt, had yet to get its first victory. Finally, on June 12, 1943, the 56 Fighter Group shot down its first plane, an FW-190. That seemed to break the pilot's bad luck. From then on, the 13th pilots from the 56 surprised the formation of FW-190s and blasted 3 of them from the sky without a loss. From then on, the 56 went on a rampage, more than earning the nickname the Wolf Pack.
I had a 109, got a 109, I think, in December. We'd chased him from altitude on down, and we were really moving going down. And so I just stayed with him, and then he went into the clouds, so I pulled back up because I knew I'd overrun him. And sure, up there he came out of the clouds, and I went back down on him again and got on him and hit him right in the right wing, and he started smoking and went on crashed into the trees. So I don't know whether I killed the pilot. I didn't see a shoot. The 190 I got, the guy bailed out. And the Hinkle 111, I don't know whether, I don't think anybody bailed out of that. I didn't see anybody. I think we'd been escorting, and then if we had a little bit of gas, we might go down and see if we could find up a target of opportunity. And we ran across these guys, about 20 of them. We tangled with them, and we got 15. And one guy chased one guy, but he couldn't catch him. And we were on the deck, working on the deck, and I think we could outfly him on the deck. He couldn't get away from me. I could turn in and keep right with him, and so I just had him going and going, and he finally decided it was better get out than to get shot down.
Towards the end of the summer of 1943, the P-47C was gradually replaced by the D-Mod. Initially, little distinguished the two versions.
Prior to the fall of 1943, the P-47, including the D version, had really not proven itself to be effective as an escort fighter for the 8th Air Force. And the major problem was that they had this fuel-guzzling engine, and it limited their range so that they were unable to provide cover for the bombers into the main targets inside Germany. And this problem really isn't resolved until the P-47 D-15 model arrives in England. And this model has the ability to put wing tanks underneath each of the wings. Each of those wing tanks is 108 gallons. And that gives the P-47 D-15 the extra range it needs to begin to be effective as an escort fighter for the heavy bomber force.
The Thunderbolt now had almost twice the amount of fuel of earlier versions. P-47s soon appeared over Germany within 150 miles of Berlin, wreaking havoc wherever they went. By the spring of 1944, the Thunderbolt had come into its own as a high-altitude escort fighter. Yet just as it reached its zenith, it was eclipsed by the longer-legged P-51 Mustang. As more P-51 Mustangs flooded in England, the Thunderbolts rapidly disappeared from the 8th Air Force inventory until just the 56 Fighter Group continued to fly them. The 56 refused to change over. They loved their 47s, especially after the new wide-bladed propellers arrived that greatly enhanced the plane's climb rate and acceleration. Also, by this point, Republic started to produce a lightweight, more powerful version of the P-47 that only the 56 Fighter Group used in combat. Designated the P-47M, it was the ultimate Thunderbolt.
There's about 150 of them made, and they all came to the 56 Fighter Group, except maybe a couple generals got. Actually, it was the best propeller plane that was actually in the war. And I think it was clocked at the fast, I think about 470 or 480. I think the 351 is about 460. It was supposed to be and we were the fastest, actually it was the fastest plane that they had.
The P-47M also came with a dramatically increased range, thanks to the advent of larger capacity external fuel tanks. This was the ultimate version of the Thunderbolt in Europe, and was finally able to stay with the bombers all the way through Berlin and back.
You just cruise back and forth. If you're top cover, you just kind of weave back and forth. Or if you were maybe at the target, you'd go over the target and you just kind of weave back and forth over the target until all the bombers left, and then you'd go back. Usually you'd either have duty of taking them in, you'd pick them up at a certain point, you'd take them to a certain point, then another group would relieve you. And then, because we couldn't stay up there that long, see, the bombers fly, 8, 9, 10-hour mission, and depending how far it is. And then you'd go home, and they would take them so far, and then somebody else would pick them up and bring them home.
Even in the war's waning months, the P-47 proved to be a formidable air-to-air adversary and continued to rack up an impressive toll against the Luftwaffe's best and latest fighters.
My squadron flew one mission where I think they shot down 11 long-nosed F-190s. Eight P-47s shot down 11 long-nosed 190s, didn't lose anybody. But I was on the Riviera on R&R on that mission. So.
By war's end, the 56 Fighter Group had become the top-scoring 8th Air Force unit in air-to-air victories. While the group lost 128 P-47Ss in combat, its pilots shot down 674 German planes and destroyed another 300 on the ground. With almost 1,000 planes to its credit, the Wolf Pack had more than proven that when used right, the P-47 could be a terror to all its foes. Throughout 1944, as its long-range escort role diminished, the 9th Air Force adopted the P-47 for a new role: ground attack. Never designed for low-altitude work, pilots weren't sure how the Thunderbolt would function down on the treetops, shooting up German targets on the ground. Though it didn't perform as well on the deck as it did at 25,000 feet, the P-47 soon more than proved its worth in the new role. In fact, by war's end, it had compiled a record so remarkable that it easily became the best American fighter bomber of the war.
Among its many contributions was as the premier American ground support machine. This was the close air support fighter par excellence in the Normandy campaign. In fact, Saving Private Ryan, I thought, was an excellent movie. But at the end, where the tank busters arrived and saved the day, they're P-51 Mustangs. It would have been, I think, more accurate and more representative of what actually happened to have those be P-47 Thunderbolts doing the ground support mission. Because the P-47 was a true ground support star, whereas the P-51, yes, it did those missions, but that wasn't its major contribution.
On the deck, the 47's ruggedness was its greatest asset. Many of the Thunderbolt pilots survived the Holocaust of flak and machine gun fire thanks to the sheer toughness of its plane's hide.
I was the number 4 pilot, being the youngest, or the newest, I should say, and tooling along, and suddenly the field out in front just lit up like a Christmas tree. I took something in the right wing that blew off every shell I had out there. I had not fired a round at that time, but it had to have been of incendiary nature because there wasn't any ammunition left when it was all over. It blew the gun tray lid on the 4 guns out in the right wing up about that high. And, of course, holes all over the thing. Headed for home, decided the damn thing was flying and I would stay with it. Let down then, probably about 20, 30 miles from home, put the wheels down way out. Everything worked fine, except that the stall speed was all screwed up. Landed, burned the brakes out or not, I really didn't care. They class 2060 airplane anyway. They didn't have repairs for them, and with that wing the way it was. I guess I was forever thankful that the darn gear went down. But 1,800 rounds, and you could see visible flame in there from whatever hit it, set it off or set the ammunition off. And that was, be real proud, even though he didn't like the 47, having come from 38s, but it absorbed tremendous damage. As far as I was concerned, it was a testimony to the manufacturing talent of the Republic.
The Thunderbolt's powerful engine could drag aloft a dizzying array of bombs and rockets, making it amazingly versatile in the fighter-bomber role.
We had 2 500-pound bombs, and then normally we carried a fragmentation bomb on the belly, 260-pound frag bomb, which was an anti-personnel bomb.
Carried a wide variety of bombs and what have you. We carried 2 500-pound bombs. We carried napalm. We carried 1,000-pound straight GPs. We carried 1,000-pound. They were in a shell similar to 50-gallon drum, just pure dynamite. They were concussion instruments because some of the areas that we were dive bombing in and against troops were steep enough that the concussion, the blast, would kill people. It just depended on what the particular ground support mission requested.
As the P-47's role as an escort fighter was eclipsed by the P-51, so grew its role as a ground attack weapon. 9th Air Force P-47s played a tremendously important role from D-Day through to the end of the war, supporting the ground troops as they pushed forward into the right.
We were almost entirely there to support troops on the ground. In my case, we were in what we call 29th TAC. The 9th Air Force is organized into 3 tactical air forces, 9th, 19th, and 29th. And 9th was on the south end, 19th was in the middle, and 29th was on the north end of the U.S. forces as we were going across France and Germany. And so we supported the troops that were in 9th Army. We would go out and they'd say armed reconnaissance. And what that meant essentially was if you see anything moving, go hit it. Because by that time in the war, the Germans, there were no civilian vehicles moving in Germany. They were all related to the military in some way, even though horse-drawn and all that was usually carrying ammunition or food or something for the troops. And anything from a single staff car to a convoy of trucks would be a target if it was moving and we were there. I can recall a mission where we were strafing. There were about 4 or 5 large trucks. They weren't semis. They were big vans on a truck chassis, and just going down the road in convoy, and we were strafing those, and they were coming to an intersection, a 90-degree intersection in the road, and in one corner of that was the woods. And as my flight commander was pulling off the target, he just happened to look down the woods. He said, "Hey, that woods is full of airplanes." So next time around, he made a pass on the woods, strafing. And we hadn't had a shot fired at us till then, and then the whole sky lit up. And he got 104 or 5 holes in the squadron commander's airplane in the process. Lost a cylinder off his engine, and lost his radio. I was flying his wing. He hollered at us, "Don't come in," and none of the rest of us did. So he's the only one that got hit. But he got it home with 104 holes in the airplane and 1 cylinder missing off the engine and so on. Then the next day they went back out and bombed the airfield itself and knocked it out.
Tanks were flying targets for the rolling bands of Thunderbolt pilots. During the Battle of the Bulge, the P-47 squadrons helped blunt the German attacks on those few days when the weather cleared enough to get the planes aloft.
Target ended up being, it was 5, might have been 6 Tiger tanks that were parked in an open field, snow on the ground. So they were probably very visible, parked in an open field. And I think probably because of the fuel situation, the Germans had no fuel. They were out of fuel. And they had parked them there and lined them up and were using them as artillery. But those were our targets. And the guy, it's a kind of a story in my group, or in my squadron. I just saw the guy yesterday. Dropped a 500-pound bomb right down the open hatch of a Tiger tank. It just happened to go right in the hatch.
During the crossing of the line, the 9th Air Force's P-47s once more played a key role in the overall operation. Thousands of Allied aircraft poured over the White's western frontier, suppressing flat batteries, wiping out tanks, trucks, and infantry units with gasoline effectiveness. Yet the Germans, with all their proficiency, were able to strike back with desperate intensity.
We went up there with bombs and guns and waited to be hollered at for a target, or something like that. We watched the paratroopers go in. The Germans actually, when the paratroopers went across, I don't know how high they were, but I would guess 5,000 or 6,000 feet. The Germans actually lowered the 88s, the anti-aircraft 88s, and fired so that the shells broke amongst the parachutes. After the guys were out of the airplane, their chutes were open. And it was pretty bad. You could just see that. And the gliders came in, they were getting hit too. But, and while we were doing that, waiting for a target to be called, we had a squadron of British Lancasters come overhead and open their bomb bay doors and start dropping bombs just almost through our formation. There was a lot going on that wasn't all coordinated as well as it could have been. Nobody got hit or hurt, so we were okay.
By war's end, Thunderbolt units had destroyed more targets than any other British or American fighter bomber. Tens of thousands of trucks, hundreds of tanks, thousands of aircraft, troops, and tons of supply went in flames as a result of marauding P-47 attacks. No other aircraft pack as devastating a punch, and nothing in the air could take the amount of ground fire and get its pilot home as could the beloved P-47. When the world celebrated VE Day, the JUG pilots in the 8th, 12th, 15th, and 9th Air Forces could look back the fight on their accomplishments, knowing they played a significant role in defeating the Nazi war machine. While the P-47 played an integral role in the war in Europe, Thunderbolts had less success in the Pacific theater until very late in the war. The major thing that stymied the 47's operational use against the Japanese was its massive fuel consumption.
What really shook us up when we were getting P-47 to New Guinea was the way that thing consumed gasoline. Fuel consumption was enormous, compared to a P-40.
The P-47 represented a lot of challenges to the guys in the 5th Air Force, one of which was the fact that it consumed fuel at such a rapid rate. But when the 348th Fighter Group arrived in the Southwest Pacific, its commanding officer, Neil Kirby, became one of the advocates for the Thunderbolt. And he went all over to different fighter units in the 5th Air Force to try to convince, he was almost evangelical about it, to try to convince the other fighter leaders that this was a terrific aircraft type. He was met by stiff resistance, but eventually there were several Thunderbolt groups that were deployed into the Southwest Pacific, and they gradually figured out ways to work around the fuel consumption issues.
Half a world away, Claire Chennault's 14th Air Force in China was offered the P-47. Chennault, with his crippling fuel shortage, was not impressed.
He took the 47, they ferried him across to China. And when Chennault found out the kind of fuel consumption the 47 had, he kicked him out of there in one big hurry. Just couldn't afford that kind of a drain on his limited fuel supplies.
Though the P-47 never saw widespread use in China, it turned out to be an excellent fighter bomber for Burma. Here, as in many other theaters, the 47's ruggedness saved many lives. Meanwhile, as the front moved closer to Japan and the Central Pacific, the P-47 squadrons of the 7th Air Force were in the vanguard of the advance. When the Marines and Army landed in the Marianas Island in June of 1944, the P-47s of the 318th Fighter Group were operating from the island within just a few days after the invasion of Saipan. Getting to Saipan, however, proved to be a great challenge, unable to ferry them in from any forward Central Pacific air bases. The 7th Air Force resorted to putting the 318th P-47 on escort carriers. The baby flat tops sailed to the Marianas laden with the ungainly Thunderbolts. Once off of Saipan, the men of the 318th climbed into their P-47s and catapulted off the narrow carrier decks. Miraculously, not a single P-47 was lost during the operation, and the 318th was soon operating in support of the ground troops from Isley Field on Saipan. It was the only time in history where Thunderbolts were launched from aircraft carriers and had been a rousing success. At war's end, the 7th, 13th, and 5th Air Force's P-47 groups were marshaled around Ishima and Okinawa. Preparation for the invasion of Japan flying ground attack, combat air patrol, and long-range escort engines right up to the Japanese surrender, the Pacific Thunderbolts were given a solid, if unspectacular, account of themselves. In one of the last and great Thunderbolt fights, the 318th Fighter Group managed to shoot down 34 kamikazes of Okinawa in the running 4-hour battle.
The last major production variant of the P-47 was the N model, and about 1,800 were built, and Republic Aviation had designed them specifically to overcome the vast distances involved in the Pacific War. The P-47N had a much greater internal fuel capacity, and they were capable of escorting B-29s all the way to Japan and back from bases on Iwo Jima and Okinawa.
When Japan finally surrendered in August of 1945, the Thunderbolt had become the most heavily produced American fighter of its generation, with over 15,000 being produced. As an escort aircraft and ground attack weapon, the P-47 formed the backbone of the Army Air Force's fighter commands through the tough middle years of World War II. In the post-war years, the P-47 quickly disappeared. By the early 1950s, the once omnipresent P-47 had become as scarce as the dodo bird. As the war faded into memory, the Thunderbolt and its accomplishments were steadily obscured by the P-51 Mustang. For 55 years, the P-47 has lived in the P-51's shadow. In reality, no other fighter contributed more to victory than the Thunderbolt. It did the dirty work, the trying ground attack and close air support missions that held no glory, but saved the lives of countless GIs in the process. The P-47 helped crush the Luftwaffe in the air and on the ground, setting the stage for total Allied air superiority by leading. Workhorse. Loved by some, despised by others, the P-47 ranks as one of the greatest aerial weapons to have ever existed during World War II.
In the war-torn skies over Europe and the Pacific, the sight and sound of Spitfires and Mustangs were common. These and other lightweight yet deadly aircraft regularly dominated the enemy and claimed air superiority. These veteran planes had been crafted to be small and agile. However, as the war continued, greater strength and resilience became essential. A new class of aircraft took to the skies. Larger, heavier, and more powerful. A machine that could match the speed and agility of a Spitfire while staying operational even after sustaining heavy damage. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. The Thunderbolt earned its name well. Built around a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine, it was essentially a Titan with wings. Its designer, Alexander Kartveli, chief engineer at Republic Aviation Corporation, understood that top performance required the most powerful radial engine available. Pratt & Whitney's R2800 double Wasp 18-cylinder radial engine provided the necessary power. With power as a priority, Kartveli incorporated a turbo-supercharger beneath the rear fuselage. The four-bladed propeller required a 12-foot, 2-inch diameter, which in turn demanded longer landing gear and guns mounted further outboard. The P-47 was the result of a lengthy evolution process that began with early Seversky designs in 1933. Seversky himself piloted a prototype in 1935, which eventually led to the P-45. By late 1939, a new design was commissioned as the XP-47. But combat reports from Europe highlighted the need for more firepower and greater horsepower. That's when Kartveli took charge. The XP-47B prototype made its first flight on May 6, 1941. After overcoming more than the usual developmental challenges, the production P-47B took to the skies in March 1942. Jackie Cochran, one of the Alexander Seversky's top pilots, continued flying for the company after it was renamed Republic Aviation. In 1937, when most Army pursuit planes struggled to exceed 200 miles per hour, Cochrane set a record with a speed of 304 miles per hour at the National Air Show. With Jackie Cochrane consistently winning trophies for the Seversky Corporation, the company gained widespread recognition. Seversky himself had also competed, but withdrew after an accident ended his racing career. A design modification moved the engine forward by 8 inches to improve stability, resulting in the designation P-47C. By early 1943, production transitioned to the P-47D, featuring an upgraded engine, improved turbo and intercooler installation, enhanced armor, greater ammunition and weapon capacity, and a bubble canopy. Further refinements included an extended dorsal fin. Production was now accelerating, with 3 factories manufacturing P-47s, the main plant at Farmingdale, a new facility in Evansville, Indiana, and the Curtiss-Wright Company, whose aircraft were designated P-47G. Although the P-47's designers accounted for nearly everything, occasional equipment failures required creative solutions. When landing gear became stubborn on approach, pilots often used a practical and effective wing wiggle maneuver. As the P-47's popularity and success grew, so did its design enhancements. The D-series saw improvements like a universal wing capable of carrying fuel tanks, bombs, or rockets, a reinforced belly attachment for heavier payloads, and broad paddle blade propellers for better performance. In total, 12,602 of these models were produced, more than any other aircraft subtype. When the P-47s entered the fray, the Luftwaffe was inflicting significant damage across Europe. The versatile and lethal Thunderbolts were shipped to Europe in large numbers, and their success, along with that of their pilots, was quickly recognized across all combat theaters. The savage and unrelenting battles waged by the Luftwaffe against the Allies were soon met with equal force by the powerful and efficient Thunderbolts. The tide of destruction sweeping through Europe was met head-on. The first operational sortie over France occurred on April 8, 1943. While aircraft losses and mechanical issues still arose, P-47 pilots quickly adapted to their plane's toughness, speed, and firepower. With the development of extended fuel tanks, pilots took full advantage of the aircraft's increasing range, and over time, tactics were refined to exploit its superior speed. The initial roles of the P-47 included high-altitude escort missions and fighter sweeps. Pilots soon discovered that they could outdive any Luftwaffe or Allied fighter, providing them with a critical escape strategy when necessary. When the Thunderbolts made their European debut, radial engine single-seat fighters were still a rarity. The only other fighter operation in Europe comparable to the Thunderbolt was the German FW-190A. To avoid confusion during combat, Thunderbolt engine cowlings were painted white, and black bands were applied around the vertical and horizontal tail surfaces. The signal is given for a squadron of Thunderbolts to take to the skies. What might appear to be a friendly race in peacetime takes on a much darker meaning for these pilots. A war rages in the skies over Germany, and these P-47s are in a hurry to join the fray. Flying in formation, they head toward a confrontation that could cost them their lives, an ever-present thought in their minds. But these men have a mission, and their comrades need their support. The newly arrived Thunderbolts dive into a fierce battle with the Luftwaffe. By this point in the war, the German aircraft had already taken heavy losses from British Spitfires and Hurricanes. Now, with the Americans joining the fight, the German losses in both aircraft and pilots were becoming unacceptable. The intensity of their attacks persisted, but their effectiveness was plummeting. They could no longer maintain dominance over Allied skies, and they had lost control of the skies above Germany. The Allies were throwing everything they had at Germany, with much of the damage inflicted by the B-17. Naturally, the Luftwaffe wasn't far from the B-17s as they dropped their deadly bomb payloads, and these bulky, slow-moving aircraft were easy targets. Just in time, the Thunderbolts swooped in to assist the B-17s, providing much-needed protection against the German assault. Though the flying fortresses were adequately armed, they couldn't outmaneuver the faster Luftwaffe Henkels, so their success relied heavily on the air support provided by the Thunderbolts. While the war raged in Europe, Allied troops in the Pacific were engaged in combat with the Japanese. To conduct air raids against Japan, the Allies captured the islands of Saipan, Guam, and Tinian, whose proximity to Japan made them ideal locations for airfields. The heavy bombers needed runways, and after securing the islands, Allied engineers quickly set to work constructing makeshift air bases. The P-47 Thunderbolts played a crucial role in escorting bombers flying from these islands, and large numbers were also assigned to carriers in the Pacific. Though the Thunderbolts weren't originally designed for carrier operations, they performed adequately. There was no intention of landing them back on board, so they were not equipped with landing hooks. Without a runway, the P-47s were loaded onto catapults and literally shot off the sides of the carriers. Thanks to the power, staying in the air was never a problem. By the time the P-47D was developed, its engines produced up to 2,800 horsepower and could reach speeds of 433 miles per hour. Later models could hit 467 miles per hour. Once airborne, the P-47 had a range of between 1,250 miles and 2,350 miles, depending on the fuel tanks it carried. All models had a service ceiling of 42,000 feet. After landing, the Thunderbolts didn't stay idle for long. In preparation for combat, ground crews ensured each plane was stocked with ammunition. As with most of the plane's design, the armament installation was practical, robustly built, and simple to service. The Thunderbolt's increasingly deadly external weapons were also easy to load. Initially, the rocket installations were poorly designed, with accuracy issues, but these flaws were quickly addressed. The P-47 was equipped with 8 0.5-inch Browning M53 machine guns, each with 267 rounds. Later models increased the load to 425 rounds per gun. The bomb load of the P-47 was initially 2,500 pounds, but later models could carry up to 3,000 pounds of bombs and 10 5-inch rockets. In footage captured by the Thunderbolt's test engineers, hundreds of spent shells can be seen pouring from beneath the wings. Needless to say, the Thunderbolt was a formidable machine, capable of spitting bullets at the enemy with relentless, deadly accuracy. In Saipan, the P-47s became the first aircraft to use a new weapon in combat: napalm. Using external fuel tanks as containers, napalm bombs were assembled on site. A mixture of napalm and gasoline was pumped into the tanks, and a detonator was fitted. The Thunderbolts played a vital role in the Saipan, Guam, and Tinian campaigns. The fighting on Saipan extended into the first weeks of July 1944, with P-47s making frequent sorties from the airfield to the battlefield, providing close air support to ground troops. Though the Japanese soldiers on Tinian fought fiercely, they had little chance of success. The Thunderbolts had complete air superiority, and with little resistance, they were free to attack the weary garrison at will. With their overwhelming numbers and firepower, the P-47s efficiently dispatched the enemy in a coordinated assault. When the Thunderbolt pilots unleashed their napalm arsenal on the Japanese forces, victory was all but assured. The P-47's role in the Pacific theater proved devastating to the enemy. But elsewhere in the world, they were engaged in a critical and exclusive operation. In a seemingly inconsequential part of Italy, the P-47 Thunderbolt was about to secure its place in history. On the tranquil island of Corsica, the lives of the peaceful islanders had been upended by Italy's involvement in the war. Dawn. The men of the 57th Fighter Group rise with the sun. This island is now theirs. They prepare for the day with a routine they've grown accustomed to. For these men who have made Corsica their home, at a steady pace, they move through the early morning preparations, readying themselves for the inevitable battles ahead. For these men, today will be much like yesterday, and probably much like tomorrow. Lieutenant Colonel Gil Wyman has made his home in a deserted trailer once owned by an Italian general. At just 24 years old, he's in charge of a squadron. Originally from Louisville, Kentucky, his new home is comfortable, with all the modern conveniences. The American residents of Corsica share their space with the French. Though conversation is limited, they get along just fine. Both sides lost a man yesterday, so the flags are at half-mast. A small reminder that, as pleasant as the surroundings may be, these men are still stationed on an active Allied airbase, and the dangers are very real. The 57th Fighter Group is based at Alto Air Base, where 3 squadrons are stationed. The steel mat runway stretches 150 feet wide by 6,000 feet long. The tower's call sign is Breakneck. Group Commander Lieutenant Colonel Archie J. Knight. 65 Squadron arrives for their briefing. It's formal, brief, and to the point. The men sit on bomb crates as they receive their escape kits. These kits include enemy currency and instructions for returning behind enemy lines. The men are then informed of their target. Along the narrowest and most mountainous section of southern Italy's peninsula lies the Gustav Line, where Allied troops have been halted just behind it. The airplanners aim to use their Thunderbolts to attack behind enemy lines, weakening the German position. Their primary strategy is to cut off Germany's supply of troops, fuel, shells, and food traveling south. This operation is called Operation Strangle. Italy's railways form a complex system crucial to Germany's supply lines across the country. The planners of Operation Strangle intend to sever that lifeline. '65 Squadron taxis to their dispersal point at the end of the runway. Their mission is clear. Fully armed and fueled, the men are eager to begin. Though some may not return, each pilot is determined to inflict as much damage as possible on the enemy's supply chain. The crew chiefs meticulously prepare each plane for the mission. Clear visibility is vital, and while cleaning the canopy takes little time, it could save a pilot's life. A thorough inspection of every part of the aircraft reduces the risk of system failures during combat, and the crew chiefs leave nothing to chance. For pilots, regardless of rank, what matters now is how much combat flying they've completed. If they haven't flown many missions, they're considered beginners and are referred to as sprogs. They stay sprogs until they've completed a few missions. Once they've picked up a few skills, they're called sports. After surviving 50 or 60 missions and gaining considerable experience, they are promoted to old sport. The top pilots, like Gil Wyman, are known as wheels. No one knows exactly why. The wheels are marked by distinctive tail design on their aircraft. Major Richard Hunziker from Tucson, Arizona, settles into his seat. Having flown 179 missions, he's seasoned. The crew chief won't be accompanying him, but the pilot briefs him on the mission anyway. Though Okuchi can't go along, the pilot fills him in, as this is routine by now. Over time, these men have become friends, and a bit of conversation before the mission helps calm the nerves. The pilots are ready to take off, but they remain grounded. They wait. For 5 minutes, these men are given the chance to clear their minds. It's part of the plan. Any thoughts that need to be processed can be done now, while still on the ground. Once airborne, they'll rely solely on instincts and reflexes, and any lingering thoughts could slow their response times. Any concerns about home or loved ones will have been addressed by the time they take to the skies, leaving them focused and prepared to fly. Takeoff is always challenging. The Thunderbolts are heavy planes. A fully loaded P-47D weighs between 15,000 and 17,500 pounds. A mile of steel runway stretches ahead. As the squadron reaches the tower, about halfway down, they are committed. There's no turning back now. The first pair takes off, Wyman and Gustafson. The second pair taxis out, Goss and Burgess. Next are Vandor and Richardson. Finally, Smith and Atwood follow. Hickok and Murrow. The last pair, Elwood and Hunziker. They fly over Corsica, then head out over the sea. Italy lies just 60 miles to the east. After 60 miles, they are 150 miles behind the German front. The squadron moves north, towards the mountains, leaving the castle behind. Leader section. Red section. Black section. The pilots fall into formation, mirroring their squadron leader. He leads the way. When he turns, they turn. Wingtip to wingtip. When he climbs, they climb, always maintaining tight formation. The Thunderbolts carry on-board cameras to capture the action on film. One camera is positioned behind the pilot, capturing both the view ahead and behind. Another is mounted under the wing. Yet another is placed inside the wing, documenting the flight from different angles, timed with the guns in the wheel well. In the instrument panel, capturing the pilot himself. The squadron shifts into a loose string formation, each plane following one another. The leader pulls off first. The rest of the section follows at 2-second intervals. There's no bomb sight on the P-47. The pilot relies on his skill alone to drop the bombs accurately. He steers toward the bomb blasts of the planes ahead. They've already taken out a bridge. Leader section reforms overhead. Red section moves in. A miss. Another miss. A hit. Black section swoops in. Blanket fire over the target scores another hit. The squadron runs out of bombs, but they still have plenty of fuel and ammunition. They ease down to the deck in search of the next target. The squadron locates the railway tracks, a vital enemy supply line for troops, food, shells, and fuel. Destroying this line is paramount to hindering the German war effort. They move in. Following the rivers, the P-47 pilots methodically target and obliterate every rail bridge in sight, ensuring the Germans can no longer rely on trains to move their supplies south. After tracking the rails to a train, The Thunderbolt squadron attacks. Their primary target is the engine, a swift and strategic move to halt the train's movement and make the boxcars easier targets. Next, they destroy the boxcars, likely filled with supplies. The explosions confirm their suspicion. The boxes contained ammunition. With the southbound rail lines destroyed, the Germans must resort to roads for transport, making them vulnerable to further attack. However, the cost of war is evident as one Thunderbolt is shot down. The pilot is lost, and in such situations, there's little that can be done. The crews on the ground can only watch helplessly as another life is claimed in the battle for freedom. The harsh reality of war continues, as many more lives will be lost before victory is achieved. Despite the damage, Lieutenant Cheswood managed to fly the P-47 back to base. His plane was a testament to the ruggedness and resilience of the Thunderbolt, a plane that could endure severe punishment and keep flying. The P-47, with its sturdy frame and powerful engine, earned its reputation as one of the most dependable fighters in World War II. Pilots affectionately called it the unbreakable for its ability to keep flying after sustaining considerable damage. While its shape led to it being called the JUG, some incorrectly assumed it was short for Juggernaut, due to the plane's sheer power and endurance. After every mission, the Thunderbolts often came back riddled with holes and damaged wings. But the P-47's ability to stay in the fight, even when battered, proved why it was a preferred choice for many combat pilots. These aircraft were vital in turning the tide of the war, whether it was supporting bomber missions, disrupting enemy supply lines, or eliminating military targets. Though the P-47's missions were perilous, its pilots trusted their aircraft to bring them back, no matter the damage it took in battle. The P-47 Thunderbolt continued service in the European and Pacific theaters proved essential to the Allied war effort. After its critical role in Operation Strangle, which crippled German and Italian supply lines, the Thunderbolt solidified its place in history as one of the most reliable and versatile aircraft of World War II. The Thunderbolt's ability to deliver consistent firepower while enduring damage without failing made it a symbol of resilience. As the war progressed, the P-47 underwent several modifications to adapt to evolving operational needs. The P-47D variant, the most widely used in Europe, was the workhorse of the Allied Air Force, while experimental versions like the XP-47E with a pressurized cockpit and XP-47F featuring a laminar flow wing explored design improvements. However, the ultimate evolution of the Thunderbolt came in the form of the P-47N, a larger, heavier model designed for long-range operations in the Pacific theater. The P-47N's increased range and firepower were crucial to its success in battles across the Pacific Islands. On Corsica Alto Air Base, where the war seemed endless, the crews continued their relentless missions, striking at the heart of enemy infrastructure and ensuring that the P-47s remained a vital part of the Allied arsenal. The pilots and ground crews showed extraordinary dedication, knowing that the Thunderbolt was often the last line of defense for their fellow troops and bombers. Despite the horrors of war, the P-47's unyielding performance helped maintain the Allies' air superiority throughout the conflict. The pilot's time in combat was intense and filled with the harsh reality of war, but the very act of flying and engaging in battle often served as the only true distraction from the horrors they faced. The adrenaline and focus required to carry out their missions left little room for thoughts of home or the emotional toll of the ongoing conflict. Whether attacking Luftwaffe airfields or performing dangerous strafing runs, the pilots knew their lives depended on their skill, precision, and the support of their fellow crew members. When the mission was complete and the targets neutralized, the pilots followed the disciplined procedure for landing. They would carefully peel off to reduce speed, spacing their planes out to avoid collisions, and making the approach for landing. As they touched down, the ground crews anxiously waited to ensure that every pilot made it safely back. Despite the harrowing nature of the work, the operation had been a success, and the Thunderbolts had once again proven their worth, further cementing their place in history. The camaraderie between the pilots and ground crew remained strong, and their shared determination made every mission a collective effort, one that brought them all a step closer to victory. The relentless effort of the P-47 Thunderbolts had played a crucial role in weakening the German supply lines and crippling their ability to sustain their forces in Italy. As the Allies' ground forces moved northward, the airstrikes coordinated by the Thunderbolts had been instrumental in pushing the Germans into retreat, helping the ground troops advance towards Rome. On June 4th, 1944, when the Allies liberated Rome, the pilots and crews at Alto Air Base could feel the satisfaction of knowing that their efforts had been a significant part of that victory. The Thunderbolt had proven itself not just as a powerful fighter, but as a symbol of resilience, tenacity, and the importance of air support in the success of a ground campaign. As they celebrated their hard-earned victory, the pilots of the 57th Fighter Group and their fellow airmen knew that the P-47 had served them well in more ways than one, both as a capable and dependable aircraft and as a vital contributor to the Allied success. The battle had been long and difficult, but the Thunderbolts had stood strong, providing essential support and leaving a lasting mark on the course of the war.
He grew up in tiny Oil City, Pennsylvania, the son of immigrant parents. He showed no interest in flying until 1938 and his college days at Notre Dame, and nearly no one described him as a natural pilot. But he was a natural warrior. He was one of a handful of fighter pilots who launched themselves against the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. His first air combat was fought in a British Spitfire with a Polish fighter squadron. But he would make his mark with the P-47 Thunderbolt, emerging from World War II as the top ace in the European theater with 31 German kills. He would go to war again in Korea and achieve his ace's status a second time, this time in jet fighters. His experience led him to create a completely new set of air combat tactics that saved American lives. He was born Francis Gabreski, third of 5 children of his Polish immigrant parents. They lived in a small town north of Pittsburgh called Oil City and ran the local grocery store. They changed the name to Gabreski to make it easier to pronounce. But the boy who would become one of America's greatest air aces spoke his entire life with a pronounced Polish accent. Francis Gabreski graduated high school in 1938, just as Hitler's legions marched into Austria. He says his eyes were focused on college, on Notre Dame, and eventually medical school, like his older brother. After Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939, Gabreski knew the United States would be going to war, and when it did, he was determined his weapon would be an airplane. He joined the Army Air Corps as a cadet in 1940. He trained in PT-17 Stearman biplanes with sleek blue and yellow paint. Gabreski admits he was not a natural pilot. He was nervous, always trying to wrestle the airplane around in the sky, compensating for the torque of the radial engines. He nearly didn't make the grade, but he did qualify, and after some advanced training was allowed to select his first assignment. He chose someplace that sounded glamorous, exciting.
I chose Hawaii. Hawaii, of course, I mean, it was a glamorous place. I read about it from travel logs and so forth. It's a beautiful climate. People are nice and tan, beautiful, and so forth. And the girls are even prettier.
But Gabreski found himself in at the start of the war he knew was coming.
I was getting ready for church, and I could hear the bombardment off in the distance. And I paid no attention to it because the Navy does have a range in the mountains. They work 7 days out of the week. There's Sundays when they probably drop a few of the practice bombs. And then all of a sudden I heard machine gun fire. And that machine gun fire was right next over me. And I looked out the window, and sure enough, there was a Zero flying with his machine guns wide open and so forth, strafing everything before him. And I saw the rising sun. And that was my first indoctrination into World War II. And of course, there's no question about being scared. I was scared stiff, but at the same time, I was trained to do a job. We looked at the line, and of course, the buildings, some of the hangar lines were going up in flames. The flight line was going up in flames. Our number one job was to move away the intact airplanes away from the burning airplanes. And of course, that wasn't easy because all our ammunition was in the hangar line. The hangar line was up in flames, and it was just like Roman candles in. In other words, you could see the tracers coming up and firing, and they were more scary than they were destructive. So we did our work, airmen as well as officers, shoved out the airplanes away from the burning airplanes. And by the end of, say, an hour and a half, well, we were able to save about 75 of the 150 airplanes that were parked on the line. We did become airborne about 2 hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor. It was a very, I would say, somber flight. I looked down from about 6,000 feet over Pearl Harbor and saw all those airplanes just over off from their side, or going up in flames. And it was just a big, billowing black smoke all over Pearl Harbor.
With much of the air power of the Pacific gone and the Navy clearly in charge, Gabreski felt out of the action. The Air Corps found itself trying to salvage what was left of its Pacific bases. Gabreski filled his time reading up on the war in Europe. The Battle of Britain action report showed that the fighter squadrons with the highest kill ratios against the Germans were Spitfires, piloted by members of the Polish Air Force. Gabreski had an idea. He would use his language skills and attach himself to a Polish squadron to learn their combat tactics. He would then pass them along to the Americans when they arrived in Europe. His idea earned him a trip to Washington and a promotion to captain on his way to London.
I came over as a casual. I came over as an individual flying with the Polish Air Force to gain experience. So I joined the 315 squadron that was flying Spit 9s, and it was just a super airplane. So I flew with them on 20 missions.
In February 1943, Gabreski left the Polish squadron. The Americans were arriving in England in force, and it was time to put the lessons learned to the test. He joined the 56th Fighter Squadron of the U.S. 8th Air Force and met his new aircraft, the P-47 Thunderbolt. After the tight quarters and sleek lines of the Spitfire, the Thunderbolt was a battleship.
After 20 missions with the Polish Air Force, I joined the 56, which was the first group that was coming in intact from the United States of America with a brand new airplane, a P-47. So you can imagine when I went from a Spitfire, which is nothing more than about a 7,500 pound airplane, to this great big belly tub that I saw. My God, what a big airplane. It was twice the size of the Spitfire. But it turned me off immediately, but that was the only thing I had to fight in, and that I was going to learn to fly it. So I took the airplane up, and it was a good airplane. It was a good airplane because it had a turbo-supercharger that could derive to 2,000 horsepower at sea level, as well as up to 30,000 feet, when the velocity of the turbo-supercharger would not accelerate any faster because it would disintegrate.
Unlike the mission of the Spitfire to intercept and shoot down attacking German bombers and fighters, the role of the Thunderbolt was clear: protect the bombers of the U.S. 8th Air Force. Also, unlike the Luftwaffe and the RAF, he was about to command a unit in a uniquely American Air Corps.
We're all amateurs. The Germans were all pros. The RAF, they were pros. And all the Belgium and all the other Allied forces, they were pros by the time that we were there. So we were going to learn from them. And it took us quite a few missions before we felt very comfortable in the operating field where we knew what we were doing.
The U.S. 8th Air Force was in Europe to carry out daytime strategic bombing of the enemy. The P-17s were slow, long-range bombers. The 56th Fighter Group was to escort those bombers to or from the target, to protect them from German fighters the best way they could, and come home. After a non-combat injury sidelined him for several months, Gabreski came back with a vengeance. On August 24th, 1943, he scored his first confirmed victory at FW-190. On September 2nd, he scored his second.
You're not out there to glamorize the destruction of fighter aircraft. You're there on a specific mission to keep those bombers from being shot down. In other words, if you could scare away, which we have on many occasions, where the Focke-Wulf 190s and 109s would break off because we'd start coming in head on to them and with our guns wide open and so forth, firing at them, so they'd turn over and go down to the deck. We wouldn't follow them, naturally. I mean, because we did our job.
In January 1944, General Jimmy Doolittle, fresh to the 8th Air Force from his North African experience commanding the 15th, changed the general orders for U.S. Fighter Command. The only way to beat the Germans was to eliminate their aircraft and pilots. The role of the fighters was no longer to simply escort bombers. Now they had clearance to pursue and flame every German aircraft they could, in the air or on the ground. In February 1944, the 56 went on a binge. Gabreski called it the Big Week. Now flying missions over Germany using extender tanks, the P-47s of the 56 scored 59 kills in 5 missions. Gabreski owned 3 of them, running his number to 11. He was now an ace twice over. Now he was racking up kills faster than his crew could keep him in swastika decals. In May, he scored 3 more kills in a single day, with a 4th listed as probable. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, Gabreski was in contention for the highest-ranking ace in the 8th Air Force. Truth be told, he was anxious to match the numbers set by a pilot from his group who had been sent home after 27 air victories. A month later, Gabreski did the impossible. He beat the record with a 28th air victory. He could now go home. Gabreski had been overseas nearly 2 years and flown 165 missions. His fiancée was waiting with plans to get married as soon as he got home. Gabby was ecstatic. With the exception of an injury to a pinky finger, he had come through without a scratch. Gabreski collected his orders. Packed and scheduled to begin the long journey home July 20th, 1944, he stopped by the operations hut on his way out to say goodbye. They were busy preparing to fly another escort mission over Germany. It looked like the kind of mission where a hot pilot could run up another couple of kills. He had 31. Could he score more? Gabreski decided he had one more mission to fly. They found an airfield west of Koblenz and decided to let each of the flights take a crack at it. Gabreski led his flight team down and during his pass exploded a German bomber. He turned to make another pass, hugging the ground too close. The propellers hit, and Francis Gabreski, America's hottest air ace, was down in Germany. He would spend the rest of the war in a German POW camp. His Stalag Luft was freed on May 13, 1945. A year later, Lieutenant Colonel Gabby Gabreski, 26 years old and credited with 31 kills, retired from the Army Air Corps. But that's not the end of the story. Like many returning vets, Gabreski was anxious to complete his college degree and take up his married life. He and his wife thought the civilian life looked good, and he managed to snag a job with Douglas Aircraft. It lasted less than a year. Gabreski missed the cockpit and flying. He applied for a permanent commission, and in April 1947, returned to the Army Air Force as a lieutenant colonel. Less than a year later, he was assigned to command the 56 Fighter Group, his old combat unit, and with it came promotion to full colonel. It was peacetime work, but not for long. The tension in Korea finally exploded into open warfare, and Gabby found himself watching from the sidelines. The war went back and forth, and it looked like it would be over once MacArthur landed at Incheon. But in mid-1950, a new weapon launched into the skies, and the Americans found themselves fighting a hot new fighter, the MiG-15. Gabreski's command had just made the transition to F-86 Sabre fighters, and he wondered more than once how the planes would stack up. He was going to find out. In May 1951, Colonel Gabreski reported to K-14, the air base near Kimpo, South Korea. Gabreski was assigned to the 4th Fighter Group as deputy wing commander. They had only 50 F-86s, and their mission was to distract the MiGs away from the slower Mustangs and F-80s. To do that, they flew the area the pilots called MiG Alley.
When MiG-15 came into the theater, they put another sort of dimension. That's when I went out to operate in the Korean theater, because the MiG-15 was so superior to any other airplane that we ever had there. So the only offset to that was F-86. F-86, which was it was a Mach .9192 airplane, equivalent to the MiG-15. So that put us on par, and it kept the MiG-15s from destroying the F-80s and the F-84.
You get a bounce, cut him off, and drive in a range. When you get in a range, shoot. When you shoot to kill. Anybody get any questions? Okay, let's go again.
On April 1st, 1952, Gabreski led his group back into MiG Alley.
Tiger 2 here, I got a couple of bogeys out there, one coming around at 2 level. Roger, boy, I got him. All right, there he goes, he's going down. You got him? All right, boy, that's a good deal. Watch it, we got 4 of them coming in here on us at 7 o'clock. Hang on. All right, I got him. Go ahead, take it, I'll cover you. All right, I'm going in now. Okay, he's down, boy, you got him too.
He had 4 kills and wanted his 5th. He went head-to-head with a MiG-15, and after 3 passes, he watched the pilot pop his canopy and bail out. He was over his 100 mission limit, though he and another veteran had given orders that their sorties not be posted anymore. But he had had enough. With 6.5 kills credited to him and his 31 from World War II, he is the 3rd top air ace in American history. On June 4th, the Air Force sent him home. He had a stop along the way. President Harry Truman called him to the White House and thanked him personally.
I've had everything from a squadron to a group to a wing, and I've been in the cockpit up until I retired.
Colonel Francis Gabreski ended his combat role that summer of 1952, but his career continued. He remained in the Air Force until 1967, commanding units at bases from Kadena to Hickam to Adana, Turkey. He had flown aircraft from the old P-40 to the heavy P-47, where he achieved glory. He made the transition to jet fighters in the F-86, and had flown everything up to the F-111 supersonic fighter bomber. His record of 37.5 kills stands today. He set standards for performance and tactics. For all his contributions to the U.S. Air Force, Colonel Francis S. Gabby Gabreski is a legend of air power.
Aviation, the art of aeronautics, began with the dreamers, inventors, and daredevils who dared to defy gravity. The journey of aviation was nurtured by pioneers like the Wright brothers, whose first flight marked a historic milestone. The role of aircrafts in world wars was groundbreaking, dramatically changing warfare strategies. This initiated a technological evolution in aviation, transforming the simplistic wings of a biplane into the thunderous roar of jet engines. Let's journey through the ages of aviation. Behind every great aircraft, there were great minds. These visionaries, like Sir Frank Whittle, the innovator of the turbojet engine, redefined air travel. Then there's Skunkworks Kelly Johnson, the genius behind the SR-71 Blackbird. His designs combined speed, stealth, and power, crafting machines that dominated the heavens. The contributions of these pioneers have left an indelible mark on the canvas of aviation, shaping the course of history and inspiring generations of engineers and aviators. Each epoch in aviation history gave birth to extraordinary aircrafts, each with their own unique features and roles. The Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird was a marvel of speed and stealth. The F-105 Thunderchief, a supersonic fighter bomber, was vital in the Vietnam War. The P-51 Mustang,